The final episode of Blue Planet 2 is called Our Blue Planet, and it's about the impacts that we have on our oceans. So we open up with a shot of David Attenborough. He's basically just giving you a feel for what the episode's going to be like. It's always good to see him in these shots. And the first main bit of footage we get is in Norway, where we see all the herring, where the orcas and the humpback whales from the first episode were. And we spent quite a lot of time talking about how orcas were seen as a threat to the fishing industry. And we see a big male orca get caught in a net. Thankfully, he's able to escape. But we kind of talk about how orcas are protected there and how some sort of sustainability with fishing is required. I think that's one issue that this series doesn't really tackle very well, is overfishing. There isn't really much of a mention of it. I have heard that as a criticism of the series. And then we talk about coral reefs. We talk about how sound is so important for a lot of animals on reefs, especially when we look at the clownfish. And we talk about how they use sound to communicate with each other, to establish dominance, and also to combat predators. But when boats go overhead, the sound drowns them out, so that has a negative impact on their behaviour. That's not something I thought of. Obviously, we know that things like cetaceans use sound quite effectively underwater, but we don't ever think of fish using it. So I think that was actually really interesting and quite important to highlight, I think. Then we talk about plastic. So plastic washing up on South Georgia is a massive problem for albatross. We talk about how albatross chicks are ingesting a lot of plastic, some of which they're able to regurgitate. However, a lot of that isn't going to be passed through the system, and some of them die. In the case of one chick we saw has been killed by a toothpick. It's quite bad. We already talked about the negative impacts of plastic in the open ocean episode, but this kind of reiterates it. And what furthers that is when we talk about all these dolphins that have died off the coast of Florida, and it's believed that they're killed by the abundance of microplastics and other chemicals that we produce, things like fertilizers, pesticides, that all end up in the ocean, and how a lot of plankton ingests this, which remains in the food chain all the way up to the top, where animals like dolphins have so much of it in their system that their milk is actually toxic to their own young, hence why all the dolphins are dying. It basically just reiterates what we knew from the pilot whale sequence in the open ocean episode. And the one shot of the sperm whale with a bit of plastic in his mouth is also quite haunting. They don't really deal with that a lot, but it is quite haunting. And I think, again, this series did a lot to make people aware of the issues of plastic in the ocean. After this series came out, there was a big push across the world to use less plastic. There was a lot more paper packaging being used, not a lot of single-use plastic, and even to use single-use plastic had a lot of stigma around it. I don't think any other series was as impactful as this one for raising awareness for an environmental issue. It really was something this series did very well, and I don't think anyone involved in the series realised how much of an impact shots like that pilot whale sequence would have. So that is something that I don't think can be understated with regards to this series. Then we talk about leatherback turtles, how they're hunted in places like Trinidad and Tobago, and how there's these guys that come out and just basically help them out, and they talk about the resistance they faced when they started doing this stuff, how there was a lot of people just not happy, they were getting threatened with machetes, and now they're able to use tourism as a way of kind of protecting the turtles, taking people to show them. I do think the turtles are probably stressed out by the amount of tourists that are surrounding them. And then we talk about bycatch briefly. We talk about how animals like sharks get caught, and that obviously a lot of sharks are dying. We spend quite a bit of time focused on the whale sharks. So this was kind of like just showing you how they filmed the whale shark sequence. Really interesting. Basically them diving, following them into the depths of the oceans. It was really cool. Again, the whale shark sequence is one of my favourites from the series, so it was great to see more of that. We talk about whaling and how it's such a devastating thing, and now there's all these sperm whales off the coast of Sri Lanka. It's just nice to see. I mean, all the sperm whales are cool. Again, another highlight of the series for me was the sperm whales, so seeing them again here was also very nice. And then we talk about the Great Barrier Reef, and how there's one guy who's basically grown up around it. He did a lot of the filming there, and he's kind of devastated because the temperature of the ocean has risen. That has caused a lot of the coral to bleach and ultimately die. It's quite sad. Again, I think it did a really good job of reiterating the message from that episode. And again, seeing the tuskfish again was also nice, and also kind of sad to see how it's, its home's basically gone. Quite sad stuff. The bit when they were talking about coral bleaching as well was quite depressing because it talked about the acidification of the ocean. That was pretty effective, showing you the shells that were basically dissolving in the acid. Quite horrific to think that's what's going on in the coral reefs as well. Quite dark. Then we talk about the Antarctic ice sheets and the guys that were diving down there to film it, and how basically all these cracks in the ice sheets have released all this water into the ocean, and realistically that's just going to continue, and ocean levels will rise. And we also highlight how most of our major cities are on the coasts, and not just major cities, but even rural communities in the developing world are also coastal, and it's pretty devastating because we know that when ocean levels rise, that will have a serious impact for most of us. And then we basically get a wee outro from David Attenborough saying, we just need to help protect our oceans, and we have the power to do so, and we know that. This episode is really good. It's obviously a very different kind of episode. There's not a lot of highlights for me. I did like the whale sharks and the sperm whales, though they're probably up there, but it's more about informing than kind of captivating you. I think that's kind of what this episode's job is. And this series overall is amazing. It's great. I do prefer it to Blue Planet. There are a handful of series that have come out that did change the game with regards to wildlife filmmaking. Shows like Zoo Quest, Life on Earth, Planet Earth, and Blue Planet 2 is the most recent. Because the series had such a massive environmental impact, like the way it changed the people's view of plastic, they were constantly trying to recapture the magic of this, and it did make it popular to discuss environmental issues in these kind of programs. Usually they were kind of relegated to the end of the series or an episode like this. And you had shows that did a great job of that, things like Seven Worlds, One Planet or Our Planet, but then you also had other series like Perfect Planet, which kind of tried to shoehorn it in, and it wasn't always as effective. We are at a point where we've had so many environmental issues discussed in these programs that it's kind of starting to numb us a little bit. I don't think it's quite as impactful. I don't think they'll ever have as great a success story as they did with Blue Planet 2. So yeah, this series, great. I did try and get this one out a little bit before the Asia series drops. So yeah, I will get my top 10 list for this series out at some point. I don't know when, but it'll be out at some point. Next, obviously, Asia's coming out, so that will take up my time. But after that, who knows? So let me know what you'd like me to talk about next. As ever, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, or don't if you don't want to. And I'll see you soon, and goodbye.